Hello, my name is Dr. Lee Sue. I'm a heritage visualization specialist and illustrator for Cotswold Archaeology. Today, I'll be talking about some of the research and findings made from my PhD, a collaborative doctoral partnership between the University of Bradford and Historic Environment Scotland, with Shetland Amenity Trust as external partner, funded by the AHRC. Through this research project, I visualised rock sites in Shetland using the most cutting-edge laser scanning and photogrammetry techniques, as well as delving into the archives of these fascinating sites. So I'll be introducing you to brochs, what they are, where they're found, and why they're so fascinating. I'll be summarising in a nutshell how the project came about and the important partnerships that were formed to make this a really successful research project. We'll have a quick overview of the 3 Iron Age brochs that I looked at over the course of the project and how they are such interesting sites. I'll explain what digital documentation is and how it was used in the project and what archive records I also went through to compare to the new digital data. I'll then summarise some of what I found comparing old and new digital data and what this has told us about the site's archaeology, how these comparison techniques can assist in the conservation, and lastly, how these methods can help in presenting this archaeology to different audiences by giving you a demo of the award-winning digital iBook that I created that will soon be available to visitors to Old Scottness and Yaltoff in Shetland. Some of you watching may already know what brochs are, but for those who don't, here's a very quick summary. Brochs are prehistoric towers or roundhouses built using a dry stone method of construction. Their key features are thick double walls containing stairways, cells and galleries over several levels, as seen in this cutaway reconstruction drawing. They are often thought to be defensive strongholds, occupied by a social elite, but their purpose, original appearance and the origins of their development have long been the subject of archaeological debate, which are still being debated by different archaeologists today. We do know that some broch sites are multi-phase settlements, with earlier occupation before the brochs were built, and some sites were still being lived in after the brochs were no longer used, although this was not always continuous. Yaltoff is one of the best known of these multi-period sites in Shetland. Current evidence shows that these large, imposing structures are only found in Scotland, particularly in the Atlantic North, and were built in the Iron Age from around 400 to 200 BC. So why and how was this project set up? Well, there's a lot of broch research out there at the moment, but my research project focused specifically on what the 3D data and archive data can reveal and how it can be used. The 3 sites I researched, Musa broch, Yaltoff and Old Scottness, are special for a few different reasons I'll explain later, but all 3 together form the crucible of Shetland's broch building, which is currently listed as a tentative World Heritage Site, which Shetland Amenity Trust will be applying for full status soon with UNESCO. Shetland Amenity Trust have been a project partner, with regional archaeologist Dr. Val Turner as one of my PhD supervisors, and the Trust have kindly given access to their archives and the site of Old Scottness over the course of this project. Historic Environment Scotland were a major partner in this project too, with my research coinciding with the digital documentation team's RAY project, which is to record every property in their care. Musa and Yaltoff are 2 of these such sites in Shetland. And last but not least, the University of Bradford's School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences is a nationally award-winning university department with a specialism in the visualisation of heritage using scanning technology, and with a long history of research in the Northern Isles of Scotland. What makes these 3 sites particularly interesting to focus on is the history of their treatment over time. Musa has stood tall ever since the Iron Age and is the tallest prehistoric building in Britain. It was first surveyed and recorded by Sir Henry Dryden way back in the 1850s. In contrast, the prehistoric settlement of Yaltoff was revealed during a storm in the late 19th century and underwent several different excavations throughout the early to mid-20th century. Whereas Old Scottness was only discovered in the 1970s by accident during the construction of a road, and the parts exposed were reburied until Shetland Amenity Trust bought the land in the early 1990s. With the University of Bradford, they set about a modern professional archaeological excavation of the site from 1995 till 2006. This was significant as it was the first major excavation of a Shetland broch using modern scientific methods, state-of-the-art for its time. So the 3 sites together have very different histories, of archaeological treatment, which are useful to compare to determine if this impacts on their archive's usefulness for different research compared to the latest 3D data capture. So let's look into these sites in a little more detail. Musa is arguably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, broch there is. Most often it's the one you see when you search for images of brochs on the internet or that you see in books. Its date of construction is debatable. Some believe it was around 400 BC. It's something that the new non-invasive digital records sadly cannot tell us. Nevertheless, the site has stood since it was built in the Iron Age, but we do know that it's been used and changed over time. It was actually recorded in the Orkney saga as a place used as refuge for Vikings on a couple of occasions. We know from records since the 18th century that stones have been moved, the interior has been filled with debris and cleared on several occasions, but it was Dryden who conducted the first measured survey of the structure, as you can see on this image to your left. In the early 20th century, the Ministry of Works surveyed the site again after it was placed into state care, but it has never been investigated in modern times, and sadly, few finds survive to the present day from historic clearances, so its archaeological material record is very limited. In contrast to Musa, the Iron Age settlement at Yalshof was only exposed after a heavy storm in the late 19th century. The site itself was named by Sir Walter Scott. At the time of his visit to the site, only the ruins of the medieval hall were standing and exposed, and it features in his novel The Pirate. When the prehistoric remains were revealed in the 1890s, the landowner, John Bruce, hired workers to excavate the site, who revealed the broch and several wheelhouses, which are later roundhouses that have an interior plan shaped like the spokes of a wheel. Bruce published an article about his findings in the journal Proceedings of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, which included very early photographs of the exposed archaeology and a plan drawing of the site. The site was placed into state care in 1922, and sporadic excavations took place, which revealed a Bronze Age settlement and smithy and Norse farmstead until the outbreak of World War II. After the Second World War, the archaeologist John Hamilton was tasked with organising a new excavation of the site, and he also set about the task of consolidating the findings of these new excavations with all the previous works on the site, which was published in 1956. Barring some small trial trenches and monitoring, there hasn't been a major excavation of the Iron Age site in modern times. Now, Old Scottness has a very different story, as it was completely unknown until its accidental discovery in 1975, during the building of a new road at Shetland's airport, so it hadn't been disturbed by antiquarian investigations. It was excavated in high detail from 1995 to 2006 by the University of Bradford and Shetland Amenity Trust. In contrast to the other sites, modern archaeological techniques were used, and a full excavation record was produced and published, with a detailed survey and photographic archive. It is similar to Yalshof in having multiple periods of use and reuse. In the case of Old Scottness, the surviving standing structures spanned from the Middle Iron Age Broch Tower, Late Iron Age and Pictish village, Viking settlements, and there was some post-medieval activity too. There is still unexcavated archaeology beneath the upstanding structures, which were selected to be preserved as highly significant examples of Iron Age architecture. So you can really see how differently each of these broch sites has been treated over time. What that's left me with is a varied set of different archive records. You can just imagine the substantial archives of so many upstanding archaeological sites all over Britain. Now for my project, I wanted to see just what these legacy records could tell me when used in conjunction with fresh new data captured with the latest technology. The aim was to understand the breadth of information that we might be able to find out about sites who've been similarly treated to these three as a method of comparison. It was rather nice seeing more informal record photos like this slide showing reenactment performances for visitors at Old Scottness during the excavations as I was delving into all of these archive records. I looked at records archived with Historic Environment Scotland, Shetland Amenity Trust and the University of Bradford, including those belonging to the director and co-director of the Old Scottness excavations, Dr. Stephen Dockrell and Dr. Julie Bond. As project partners and my PhD supervisors, they kindly allowed me access to all these materials. I digitised film photos and examined older images, publications and reports to build timelines of events of these sites, like a biographer for each of them. I also trialled photogrammetry of old photos that never had that purpose originally, to recreate the 3D structure of old Scottness from the time the photos were taken, so these could be compared to the new laser scan data we captured. Now this leads nicely to me explaining exactly what this technology is. In a nutshell, laser scanning and photogrammetry are 3D survey techniques that are non-invasive, i.e. there's no physical contact between the survey instruments and the features recorded, which is great for conservation purposes. Both can capture highly accurate and detailed datasets and present unique views of the structures surveyed, such as this cutout view of Musa broch. These techniques are becoming quite commonplace in archaeology, particularly photogrammetry, but I'll give a very quick summary of them. Now in this project we use terrestrial laser scanners, as you can see on the photo on the bottom left there of me operating one on the top of Musa broch. Now this term differentiates them from airborne laser scanners that are used in LiDAR. The instrument fires harmless laser beams to collect the 3D coordinates across an object's surface. It does this by rotating horizontally and vertically, as the diagram on the right side shows. What you end up with is called a point cloud, which consists of thousands, if not millions, of points. I like to call this 3D pointillism. So after that, you can then process and analyse this data. Photogrammetry is a technique of obtaining reliable measurements by means of images, and the modern technique uses overlapping images taken on digital cameras to produce 3D point clouds by calculating the positions they were taken from. You can see how the camera moves around an object and takes a photo from each position in this diagram on the top right. This particular type of photogrammetry is called structure from motion. You can have your camera set on a tripod, or for very large areas you can set it up on a photographic mast, as seen on the photo on the bottom left there, to cover many wall tops and whole sites, as in the case of old Scottness. When the images are processed in photogrammetry software, it finds matches of unique patterns of points across all the photos used, and it is able to spatially place these as digital 3D points to produce a point cloud. On the bottom right is a view from the software Agisoft Metashape, where each blue rectangle with a black line on it represents a photograph that was taken around the medieval cross that was captured in 3D. You can see how the camera moved around the monument in a circular band to fully record its entire surface. So after a dense point cloud is generated, which is highly detailed, it can then be further processed for analysis or used to render a solid 3D model, which I did through this project. So what can we learn from all of this different data? Well, there is an awful lot, but with the time I've got available, I'll just summarise a few key findings. Comparing historic imagery to the most cutting-edge 3D data was fascinating, and its major contribution was in observing more recent changes to the archaeology. Of course, photographs and 3D scans can only show you what a monument looked like at the time of recording. However, this was particularly useful with all the imagery held in the archives, as we knew when it was taken. The condition and changes at these monuments was very noticeable in modern times. This does make us stop and think that no monument stands as a constant, and that standing archaeological sites are ever-changing, with many observations not published in detail. If we notice such changes, we can study them, and I think there's a lot of potential in examining the more recent histories of many archaeological sites this way. At Yaltov, the historic photos and plans showed where conservation and safety measures were added to protect people and the archaeology. The records also show what the Bruce family mausoleum looked like before it was dismantled in the 1950s, as seen in this photo that was taken in the mid-1920s. Plans had been drawn which showed its footprint and location on the site, but there's only a few visual records of its appearance which are in the archives, so this is very useful and insightful information. At Musa, these before and after photos from 1919 are a great example. When Musa broch came into the care of the state that year, a decision was made to lower the entrance, as it was believed that it was lower when it was first built. But we don't know when the entrance was actually made taller. We know it was cleared and made easier to access in the early 19th century, but it may well be that lots of changes were ancient. We do know that Vikings took shelter at the broch, and interior lintel stones were broken into to widen the ceiling. This shows a very interesting mentality of the site custodians in the early 20th century, that they wanted to show an Iron Age past, but that had already been changed a lot. Unsurprisingly, if we can notice variations and changes to the archaeology, this can also feed into management and ongoing conservation practices at sites. Historic changes are areas that may need more detailed monitoring in the future. Looking at archive photos, we can see some of the major conservation that has happened to protect sites like Yarlshof, as seen in this photo from 1906, before seawalls were installed at the site. We can see lots of erosion. However, much of what I observed in comparing laser scan data to survey drawings were subtle variations. Some stones possibly moving a couple of centimetres, and even then, a lot of these potential movements cannot be fully affirmed due to the lower resolution of earlier photographs, as in the case of Scottness, or the lower accuracy from historic surveys, in the case of Musa and Yarlshof. However, it can be an effective technique of keeping an eye on upstanding sites that have such expansive survey records. I found that laser scanning and photogrammetry also provide very valuable, highly detailed new baselines that future surveys can be compared against, which is incredibly important in the new and future maintenance and protection of these sites. I was even able to successfully process and generate 3D data from old digital photographs of Old Scottness, so a representation of select areas as they appeared at specific times in the past was possible. The applicability of this technique on different archaeological sites really depends on the suitability and availability of old photos that are suitable. However, if they are, it can offer a valuable way of retrospectively monitoring for previous changes and movements to stonework. As I've mentioned in the previous slides, I did lots of research comparing these three sites across time, and they're particularly special because they've been used across many time periods. However, visualising this can be difficult when we don't have those perfectly positioned before and after shots. So what I did was take a 6-month placement at Historic Environment Scotland and, with guidance from teams across their office at the engine shed in Stirling, designed and developed a multimedia resource which incorporates both new digital data and information from archives. This educational resource was an iBook. It's a multimedia ebook format which reads and presents 3D data, HTML widgets and videos. Its main aim is to provide digital accessibility to these three archaeological sites, as they aren't always physically accessible, having seasonal opening times and needing ferry transport in the case of Musa. Also, there are areas of all three sites that wheelchair users or people with mobility impairments may not be able to access. The idea behind the iBook is to provide access to all and to learn more and engage with the archaeology and unique histories of these three sites, and how they have fascinating long-lived histories that span many hundreds of years. One way was to add these interactive pages that you can see in this video here, with captions, which work with Apple's Read Out Loud feature too on iPads. They let readers find out about the different features at the sites, as not all buildings and structures have signposts or information boards when you're there on site. What worked particularly well was the opportunity to use different media to present the different layers of archaeology. I wanted to ensure content was varied whilst the significant messages about the sites were presented, about their construction and Iron Age archaeological significance, changes over the time, the environment and landscapes around the sites and climate change, and their later use associated to local stories in Shetland. These topics were selected with consultation from teams at Historic Environment Scotland. As you can see going on the screen there, a wide range of contents was designed and used within the educational resource, ranging from high-resolution still photography, illustrations, 3D laser scan data, fly-through videos, and interviews with experts in the site. Now, these are all used to be engaging to as wide an audience of readers as possible, of all ages. One of the main draws of the iBook are the 3 virtual tours I created of the Yarlshof, Musa and Old Scottness. The one of Yarlshof is running as a screen capture now on screen. These also use a mix of media, including 360-degree photography captured on site by Historic Environment Scotland staff from the Digital Innovation team. These let you pan around the site at all angles and are designed to give you the impression you are standing and looking around in real life. You can control your view by touch control and even motion control with some iPod models. Information hotspots let readers find out more about specific features as they virtually explore the sites and pop up when they are tapped. I designed small location maps which can be seen on the top right corner of a virtual tour to help viewers get a sense of where they are looking and to understand their spatial position on site. And you can use it to jump to different locations too. Where possible, I placed historic photos around locations in the sites, so the views of the past can be compared to the modern look of them. The 360-degree photos used really do cover the expanse of all the sites, from the interior of the brochs to the tops of the viewing platforms at Yarlshof and Musa, as seen now on screen, and even inside a reconstruction roundhouse with a crackling lit fireplace at Old Scottness. We really wanted to give the impression and a strong sense of what the places are like, to give you full access to the sites and their surrounding landscapes. The iBook was highly commended in the 2020 Association for Learning Technology Research Project of the Year award. The panel particularly praised how it was gorgeous and visual and presenting a clear sense of space and place to users, which we were delighted to hear. It will be available for use at visitor centres in Shetland once they reopen, and online access is being explored. So, in summary, it is very clear from this project that there is a vast potential in delving into the archives of upstanding archaeological sites, and I've presented and very briefly summarised some of my findings in comparing such data with the most detailed and accurate cutting-edge records we can capture with digital documentation. I've briefly brushed over the significance of brochs in general, and there are many more detailed publications on that topic, but I've mainly explained why these three sites have been so fascinating to examine comparatively. I found that despite the vast differences in their archaeological histories, valuable information has been revealed and utilised in my research for all three sites. But there is a caveat in the less accurate nature of much older records that we have to bear in mind when assessing historic changes. I've discovered just how valuable new 3D recording is as a baseline of information that has a wide range of applications in research, conservation, and in presenting and making archaeological sites accessible to all, with the creation of an iBook digital education resource as a highly successful example. So I've just given you a whistle-stop tour across 4 whole years of research now. So lastly, I'd just like to thank my PhD supervisors, Professor Andrew Wilson, Dr. Val Turner, Dr. Lynn Wilson, Dr. Stephen Dockrell and Dr. Julie Bond for all their support throughout that time, the HRC for funding this collaborative doctoral partnership, and all the researchers and staff at the University of Bradford, Historic Environment Scotland and Shetland Immunity Trust who've helped and assisted me along the way. You can see a longer demo of the iBook on the YouTube link that's been posted and seen on the screen just now. And you can follow me on Twitter with the handle @LZSue for more updates on my research and work. Thank you very much for listening.